Well, Terry Tozer is an aviation expert and a former airline pilot. He joins us now from the UK. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Terry. I expect you've seen the same video footage as the rest of us. What are your first observations?
Well, I think probably as others have spotted, really, it's a very unusual situation where you've got an aircraft with the undercarriage down, descending, and apparently with no takeoff flap selected. You know, you wouldn't be 100% sure in saying that, but it does look like a clean wing, and normally there would be a degree of flap set for takeoff in order to generate the lift necessary to get a large aircraft off the ground.
I understand this is the first deadly crash involving a 7878 Dreamliner. Until now, I mean, that aircraft type appears not to have had any major issues. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right. And I doubt whether it's a type-related incident in this case. I mean, one can never be sure this early on. But it is very extraordinary to see an aircraft that soon after takeoff with no flaps, because it simply won't meet the performance requirements in that configuration.
There have been some videos doing the rounds, and obviously we have to be cautious of what does the rounds on social media. It might not all be authentic, but someone who claims to have been a passenger on that very same aeroplane earlier in the day, flying, I believe, to or from Delhi, says that a lot of things weren't working. The call buttons weren't working. The in-flight entertainment system wasn't working. There were various other things that seemed to be malfunctioning. I mean, should we read anything into that, or would you say these are completely unrelated issues?
Well, those systems wouldn't affect the aircraft, the way the aircraft flies, but obviously you raise questions then about maintenance. Now, why the flaps were not in the correct position, I suppose, you know, it is possible there was some technical reason for that when the crew had originally selected them correctly. It's very hard to know. It's all speculation at the moment. But normally, if the flaps were not set correctly for takeoff, there would be a warning to the crew. The aircraft would say it wasn't configured correctly. If the flaps were raised too soon after takeoff, that would be extremely unusual for a crew to make that kind of mistake. If there was a technical reason for the flaps retracting uncommanded, that would be very rare. But, you know, if you're looking at technical reasons or maintenance, I suppose the investigators will look at that. I mean, they'll look at absolutely every possible angle, I'm quite sure.
So we've talked about the aircraft type. What about the airline, Air India? I mean, what sort of a safety record does that airline have?
Not wonderful. There was an awful Air India crash when one crashed into a residential area in Karachi, and that exposed quite a lot of issues. You know, I'm very reluctant to point the finger at airline or the crew this early on in the situation, because we simply don't know. None of those things may have been a factor. They wouldn't have been the top of my list to fly with. The Dreamliner, I would have no qualms about. It's had an excellent record. You know, we're all speculating and guessing at the moment. And no doubt the investigators will be very keen to get hold of the flight recorder and the voice recorder in order to see if that gives them the answers.
And on the issue of maintenance that you raised just a moment ago, I mean, the checks that are carried out on a passenger plane before it is, you know, put to use are pretty extensive, aren't they? I mean, are they uniform? Are they the same sort of checks that all airlines operating any given aircraft type would carry out in pretty much the same way, would you say?
In theory, the manufacturer will produce a schedule of maintenance and rectification and modification and anything that might need to be done by the engineering side of the airline. We know that human beings make mistakes. We know that not everybody operates exactly the same way. And as in any other role in life, there are some better than others. But I've not heard of anything maintenance or engineering wise that would give me any particular cause for concern. At the end of the day, I think the investigators will look at absolutely every possible angle to see what could have produced this, because the aircraft should have been able to take off perfectly normally, even with an engine failure.
I mean, we were saying just a moment ago how the aircraft type, the Dreamliner, has had a good safety record up until this point. But the same can't be said of Boeing as a whole, can it?
No, and I mean, obviously, the culture at Boeing was a great concern, because the culture that allowed the creation of the Boeing Max in the way that it did was appalling. And it was a different animal altogether. This is a brand new aircraft that was designed from scratch. The Boeing Max was a development, and a controversial development, of the old 737. So I don't really see that as a direct read across from one to the other. Obviously, we'll find out more in due course.
But nevertheless, I mean, what sort of an impact do you think this will have on the Boeing brand?
It won't be good. I suspect a lot of it will be irrational. I understand their shares have plummeted, which is pretty irrational. But you know, I think the investigators will look at hard fact and data and evidence, and what the markets and the reputations do will be the same as human reaction to any disaster, I imagine.
And just looking at, you know, the short period of time that plane was in the air for, you know, didn't really achieve much of an altitude. I mean, clearly the pilot will have had very little time to react. I mean, does it look like there's anything he could have or should have done that he didn't?
It's impossible to say at this point. I mean, if the flaps were retracted when they shouldn't have been, for whatever reason, as you say, to first of all recognize that, and secondly react to it, and then thirdly to achieve a successful recovery by whatever means, not a lot of time involved. But, you know, I must stress that all public transport aircraft are designed to take off safely, even with an engine failure at the most critical point of takeoff. So this is very unusual, and at the moment, not really explicable.
Okay, so we're going to have to wait until the black box is recovered and its content released. I mean, what clues might that hold?
Well, it'll tell the investigators, assuming that the boxes are readable after that inferno. They should be, but it's not going to be a straightforward investigation. It will tell them whether the flaps were set beforehand, whether they retracted afterwards, and if so, why. So, you know, that will be, or if in fact there was any other factor that we don't know about at this point.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Terry Tozer, aviation expert and former airline pilot. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
You're welcome.